This is the DRF Players Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the April 22nd edition of the DRF Players Podcast. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatale, back with you alongside the regular podcast crew, which includes at DRF Formulator, Mike Hogan, and at UT Big Hair, Jonathon Kinchen. Gentlemen, how are you doing today?
Doing great. I woke up this morning, or I went to bed last night. I said, you know what? I'm feeling a little burnt out. I think I'm going to take a couple days off and not really play in any tournaments or not really do anything. And I'm literally handicapping the Keeneland Pick 6 right now. So
I was going to say, who are you and what have you done with Jonathon Kinchen?
Yeah, sometimes I just tell myself that, and I'm sure as most people do. And I've always found there's nothing to get going better than just to get back in it. So I'll be back in it today around the 5th at Keeneland.
Now, was that was the little break you were considering having, was that based on recent performance or just simple mental fatigue that happens to all us horse players?
Performance is cashing-wise, I haven't been well, but I've been seeing it good. I just, how that happens. So, yeah, a little bit just of everything, just that. Derby's around the corner, which is obviously a marathon. So I don't know. It doesn't matter now because the layoff has been scratched and I'm back on the track. So
I like it. I'm a big fan of those brief freshenings as horse players. It's a game that will grind you out if you let it. And I think if you're not in a position, some people who do this as a big portion of their income, they're in a position where they kind of have to bet certain amounts at certain days, and that's a lot of weight to carry when you're somebody who comes at it with from more of a semi-pro or amateur angle. Why not take advantage of the fact that you can, it's one of the greatest tools you have as a gambler in racing. You can not only pass races, you can pass race cards. And, it's frustrating, of course, if you don't look and then some horse you've been waiting on comes back and pays well and you say, oh, if I'm only paying attention. But you can't look at it that way. Sometimes the brain tells you need those breaks. But if you're Jonathon Kinchen, you don't need those breaks. You're right at him in the Pick 6 at Keeneland today. Hopefully you take that down and start the weekend with some good momentum. Mike, have you been playing much?
I wouldn't say much. A little bit here and there. Like I mentioned on the last podcast, a lot of house hunting and things have been taking up the weekends. But the one play that I did do recently from the phone was keyed up one more round who we all liked in the Lexington to underneath collected. So I did pretty well in that race and kind of just been holding steady since.
A perfect example of seeing it good and not betting it good, because I talked about the horse as well, and I didn't cash a ticket on a 40 to 1 in second. And I used collected and one other horse in the pick 5. It was just.
You had a lot going on. It was, it was a little crazy in the green room there. That does sound like a clear error, though, if you liked collected as an A-type horse and you liked that one. Did you just not make any vertical bets in the race, or was it worse than that?
No vertical bets, I don't think.
Okay, well, that's not as bad. I mean, I have that problem a lot as more of a multi-race player. There's a lot of times where after the race, I'll be looking at it and just say, oh boy, I wish I was a trifecta player. When you have those horses, when you have those B horses and C horses or even A horses hitting the board at big numbers, or all the horses that you use hitting the board at big numbers, and you think, gee, I have to sweat the next 4 legs of this pick 5, whereas if I was a tri player, I would have cold cocked that thing. But again, it's very easy. I think there's an odd bias that happens to players where it's sort of like a grass is greener thing. You don't think about all the times where it saves you a lot of money that you don't play the trifecta. You think about the one that came up and bit you in the behind. But that's one of the reasons why I think it's so important for players to not only handicap horses but handicap themselves and really understand, not just anecdotally, but through looking at their records of betting, which have never been easier to obtain than they are today through various ADWs like DRF bets, and be able to look at their performance and be like, look, these are the situations where I make money. These are the meets where I make money. These are the types of bets where I make money, and then allocate your funds to reflect that. It's another tool that I recommend if you're not already you're not already doing that, you should be. Mike, is that something that's part of your arsenal as a bettor? I mean, are you looking at your records and tailoring your wagers accordingly?
Not as much as I probably should. I certainly do look at that stuff and take a look at, are there certain bets that I do better with, or certain meets especially. But it's not something that I do on a daily basis and audit, and, you can overanalyze a lot of that stuff. So to me, it's more just something I check out here and there to make sure we're on track. But I know some people, they live and breathe in those kinds of numbers, and for me, it's a little more high level than that.
Yeah, I think a lot depends on the specifics of how often you're wagering, how much you're wagering, things like that. For me, the year, I've realized over the years, it comes down to two things. It comes down to the performance at the Breeders' Cup. It comes down to the Saratoga meeting. And so I've just increased my focus more and more on those two things as time goes on. As somebody who has this whole other job, I'm really happy just focusing on those two things. If horse playing was all that I did, I think I'd try to find some other ways to break it down. Last year I tried to get lazy a little bit. I remember talking on the pod about trying to focus on like the late races in the day. That doesn't work. When we get closer to Saratoga, I'll do my sort of red board on my approach last year and why I feel like that didn't work versus what I want to try to attack this year. But anyway, we got off on sort of an interesting little wagering discussion tangent there. We're going to go sort of old school on today's show. It's going to be a little more the loosey-goosey format. Some days we get a little more formal. We bring in top-level guests. Other days it's three guys sitting around shooting the breeze about racing, and I think that's where we're gonna go today. The first topic I want to bring up is just a little bit of a deconstruction on our Triple Crown draft that we did on the last show. We had a late entrant into our little competition, which we still don't know what the prize is. So the first thing I want to do is talk about Chris Larmy's offer to pick up the scraps from our draft, as it were, and join the contest, and make sure that you guys are both signing off on the idea of Chris being part of this contest, whatever we decide it's going to be. Jonathan, that cool with you?
You know what it is? It's like this is probably a really bad example, but it's kind of like fighting a girl, right? Like either the girl beats you up and then you're like, oh, I got beat up by, this girl beat me up, unless it's, of course, Ronda Rousey or something. Or it's like you beat up the girl and then you're the guy that beat up the girl, so he's in a perfect position, right? If he does well, then, he defeated us with all of our scraps. If he does bad, then he's like, oh, well, they were just scraps anyway, so it doesn't matter. So, yeah, it'll be
It's
fun.
a fair point. It's a fair point. But I think whatever we decide this prize is going to be, dinner down the line, something. I've got to figure we're getting the best of it with the first 15 picks, and I'm happy to try to take whatever it is we end up deciding that he's going to put up. It's a good point. Chris is in a no-lose position from a pride situation, but we can still get cut a little bit of equity out of the situation, unless, Jonathan, you're putting your foot down and saying you don't feel like he should be allowed in.
Oh, no, absolutely. He can absolutely get in. I think it's fun. It'll be good.
Excellent. Now, maybe we should review. Does anybody have Twitter open? We can see who his five were, and then possibly recap what we all decided to do.
I do
pull it up.
Yeah, I do remember off the top of my head, I know he really, really likes Destin this year. So I know Destin is one we did not pick. I think that was probably the key. I think if one of us had drafted Destin, my guess, and I don't want to speak for Chris, I mean, he'll listen to this and he can reply, my guess is he might not have been as eager to pick up our scraps if one of us had grabbed Destin. But I did find it...
Yeah. Oh, you go ahead, Mike, and then I'll have a question for Jonathan.
In addition to Destin, he's taken Creator, Sudden Breaking News, Shaggoff, and Unified as his sneaky non-derby runner for later in the Triple Crown.
It's not a bad group, and I think it tells you, it doesn't tell me that we did such a bad job drafting. It tells me that this is sort of a crazy, wide-open year. I mean, that's my read on the subject. Jonathan, what do you think? Do you think that we erred, the three of us, in not taking Destin with 15 picks for the most points in Triple Crown races?
No, I don't think so. I'm really discouraged by the fact that Destin has had a break since the Tampa Bay Derby. That's not something that Todd typically does. If you think about the horses that he's run in the Tampa Bay Derby, they've all had to start back. I think Verrazano, did Verrazano run in the Tampa Bay Derby?
No,
like
I don't believe
Super
so.
Saver.
He was in the
Yeah,
he
you're
was the
right.
New York
Super
route,
Saver.
wasn't he?
Yeah, no, he did Super Saver, and a couple of other horses. They've all run back, and so that long break to me isn't encouraging. So he's one that I'll be against unless something kind of jumps up and smacks me in the face. It reminds me I need to use him. But I think that the biggest point that I got from the horses, this whole idea was that he got in. There's only 3 of us. These are all horses that would have gotten picked if there had been one more person in our draft. And so
I think that's right. There's nothing on there where I'm like, ooh, I definitely needed that horse, and there's nothing on there where I would say, oh, forget it. So just to recap, I've got it here. My Team Pete. Tell me if this matches what you guys think. I've got Nyquist. I've got Gunrunner. I've got Whitmore. I've got My Man Sam. And am I missing one?
Mohaman.
And I've got Mohaman. Right. And then we've got Mike with More Spirit, Dancing Candy, Outwork, Exaggerator, and Majesto, which I may or may not be pronouncing correctly. And then we've got Jonathan.
I saw Travis tweet about it. He's going to call it Majesto.
Majesto, okay, that is right. I think that is correct. I after it was out of my mouth, I realized I had misspoken. And then Jonathan with Brody's Cause, Stradivari, the ultimate wise guy pick in the second round, Motom, Loban, and Cupid. So, yeah, I mean, looking back at it, they seem like fairly evenly matched teams. I mean, I think Jonathan, it's not a year. I think you could have got Stradivari a lot later, but it's not a bad pick as good as the horse looked, and knowing that you can get points for Preakness and Belmont as well. Anybody have any sort of second guesses looking at this 2 days after the fact?
No, I'm happy with my team.
I was a little discouraged by my first pick just because I really don't love Brody's Cause, but he was the best available with the best Derby-type trainer that I think will start in more than one of the races, and so I'm still up in the air if that was a good or bad pick.
Let me ask you guys this. In a year like this where, I mean, it's clearly crazy. This is a year where, before we did the podcast, some years, many years, unless something leapt out at me, I would take the approach that the Kentucky Derby is a horse race that happens on the first Saturday in May, and my serious analysis of said race would happen after they drew the post positions. And I felt like there was maybe a little bit of an edge simply by looking at the race as a horse race as opposed to getting these deep ties, weeks, months ahead into horses. I feel like this year would be a real good year to have that approach. In a year like that, where it is so open, and the favorites, while they deserve to be favorites, aren't necessarily as inspiring as some other years, is it a year where the trainer takes on a little bit more importance in your handicapping? Mike, what do you think?
Boy, I don't know. Not really. My gut says not really, because for me, I love the trainer stats, but for me, the trainer stats come mostly for trainer intent and changes, layoffs, where they're targeting races and pointing for races. Races like the Kentucky Derby, races like the Breeders' Cup, the trainer intent and the owner intent and the jockey intent is to win the race. They're not schooling the horse. They're not putting them in the spot to set them up for a future race. So it's less important to me. That said, I do look at certain trainer trends and trainer styles, and as Jonathan mentioned, the layoff for Destin with Todd Pletcher, not really a strength for him. I will look at things along those lines, but it's as handicapping factors go for the Derby, I'm not even sure trainer stats, and a lot of those would be even top 10 for me.
So are you going to be doing any sort of trainer stats work on the Derby just in case you can find a nugget or two, or is that not going to be something that you're even looking at?
I will be doing some stats work on the Derby, but less from a trainer standpoint. And I'll give an example. We got into this discussion partly with Chris jumping in on Twitter, partly because he and his buddy, a fellow public handicapper editor, Steve Simonovich, I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. I hope I am. If not, I apologize, Steve. Both love.
Go with
Destin.
Steve-O. I just call him Steve-O. I avoid the problem.
Fair enough. They both love Destin, and somebody else jumped in with a very valid question that I didn't know the answer to, and it led me to do some investigation. The question was, Destin is coming into the Kentucky Derby, a 10 furlong race, having never run past 8.5 furlongs, having never had a 9 furlong prep or longer. And I wanted to see how many horses had done that. I went back 25 years. I just picked that kind of randomly for a couple reasons. One, that's really as far back as the DRF database is reliable from a PP standpoint. 91 is kind of where it starts getting spotty. But also 25 years seemed like a good ballpark. It was not too large as to be overwhelming, but it wasn't such a small sample that you're getting some noise. So last 25 years, last 25 Derbies, 91, do you want to guess how many runners have competed in the Derby without having had at least a 9 furlong prep race?
The over-under would be a very small number, and it wouldn't shock me if you said 0, though there's probably some stretch-out sprinters who mean that there are some. I'm going to say none have done well.
No, well, 30 have tried in the last 25 years. None have won.
I think the stretch-out sprinters probably mostly, right?
No, not really. Horses like
names on that list.
Will Take Charge, Frisian Fire. Only one hit the board. And
Frisian Fire had never. That's interesting.
Frisian Fire had never. Circular Key, Showing Up, Johannesburg, Excellent Meeting, Old Trieste. There's some stretch out sprinters, but not. It's funny because Steve guessed, I bet Artax was one of them. Ironically, Artax didn't become a sprinter really until after the Derby Trail. He debuted at 7 furlongs and then never ran shorter than a mile until after his Triple Crown campaign, and then that's when they realized he was a sprinter. But anyway, back to this topic, the only one to hit the board out of the 30 was almost a little bit of an asterisk. Because it was a filly, and there are just not as many 9 furlong filly preps.
Sure, that explains Excellent Meeting's presence on that list as well.
Exactly. So the one filly was this sad 8 Bells had never run 9 furlongs till she ran second to Big Brown. So if you want to look at it in terms of the Colts that have done it, they're 0 for 28, and none of them have even hit the board. The best finish of any of them, I believe, was 5th, but I Have the Tiger, 2003.
Yeah, I get it, though. I mean, you're saying that you think that it's not something Pletcher does, but we know, everybody knows the frustration that Pletcher's had with this race.
Sure.
He's won it, so it's not the disaster some would have you believe, but I think it's pretty clear that year in, year out, we're seeing not only his horses maybe showing up and doing as well as he would have liked in the Derby, but some of them then really being non-factors from that point on, especially looking at his 2 from last year. So clearly, whatever preparations he's been doing coming into this race over the years are not something that he's happy with. So right. I don't mind him mixing it up. I'm just having this conversation. I'm warming a little bit to the idea of him doing something different. I just feel like historical stats with a race like the Derby, the game is just changing so much, and the way horses are being trained is changing so much that it's, in my attitude, some of these suppositions or rules are almost made to be broken, I think, in the upcoming years. And I'm talking about everything down to Apollo and all the rest. My gut is to not get too stuck into that type of historical analysis. For me, Destin, I guess there was just a little bit of class questions. I could see the horse taking a lot of money, and those question marks between the distance thing and the layoff, they're just enough for me that he wasn't going to be, that I like my other 5 for our contest better than him. But, he's certainly a horse who has to be at least considered. Right? I mean, we all agree on that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And let me clarify, I will be writing a little bit of an article on these Derby stats. They're less meant to be, just because these horses are over 30 in the last 25 years, that doesn't mean Destin can't win. I'm not writing it from a handicapping standpoint necessarily. It's more just a historical approach that I kind of had a little fun with, and had some curiosity myself. It's more from that. I don't want to talk anybody on or off just from a stats perspective. It's just the kind of stuff I find interesting.
I think that's something, Mike, about your work that is misunderstood. Sometimes you'll be highlighting a stat positive or negative, and it's not a question of I like this person or animal or I don't like this person or animal. It's more,
right.
Hey, here's this database that I spent a lot of time playing around in and some interesting stuff that I found. And it's interesting, people can take these things a little personally. I imagine you've gotten some hate tweets over the years.
Hate tweets is maybe a little bit strong. Our buddy Norm Cassie, when he was on the podcast prior to being on, I think he remembered one stat I had about Mark at Naira tracks on dirt that I sent out over the Saratoga meet last year. I think that one sort of stood out to him. He forgot the really positive one I had right before the Breeders' Cup.
Of course.
Yeah. So I hope people take it all in good fun. It's not that I'm saying so and so is a bad trainer. It's more just looking at trends and looking at where I will look at, and Destin's a perfect example. Where I will look at some trainer stats is more market valuation based on odds. And you mentioned Pletcher with Javier Castellano aboard. Destin is going to take money in a race where a lot of people are really trying to find a way in a horse to beat a favorite that not everybody is in love with. I wouldn't be surprised if Destin ends up as the second choice. I don't know what a fair price is for him. If you like him, Steve said 10-1 would be fine. To me, that's way too short, and he may even be shorter than that, which is...
He may be shorter than that. What did he get on the Beyer speed figure scale?
100, which is right up there with some of the top contenders.
Right, so you have a top-ish figure. You have a trainer who everybody knows who wins everything. Looking at some other figure scales out there, some other people whose figures generate money, he's even maybe a little bit faster than that. I think this horse is going to take a lot of money, more so than I'm realizing more so now than I even thought when we were talking on Wednesday. But back to that sort of initial question before we got off on a tangent for Jonathon to answer. A race like the Derby, how important are trainer stats to you?
I think it's just not so much like their performance in the Derby, but and it's kind of something we talked about a little bit earlier in our text message. I think it's just the ability of a trainer to stretch a horse out, and in all situations that to get a horse to travel at a distance that horse might not be the most comfortable pedigree-wise or running style-wise. And so I'm always interested to see that. And like I said, I've always been a fan of Doug O'Neill's ability to stretch horses out. I've been a fan of how Dale Roman stretches horses out. So their horses are obviously going to be upgraded regardless of what the paper says for me. And there's a few others that are in there as well.
We had a few examples going back and forth in our little production meeting over text message, talking about trainers and their ability to cut horses back or stretch horses out. I haven't really done much thinking about this. I mean, I don't really know what goes into that from a training point of view. I know with cutbacks, I mean, that's a favorite pet angle of many a handicapper, just based on the idea that horses cutting back will typically have more fitness than horses stretching out. But when you're looking at those two things, stretch outs and cutbacks, Jonathon, what are your sort of general thoughts on how they play into your handicapping and how they might change the way you're looking at raw numbers?
Well, I think cutbacks are the type. Stretch outs I think are more about a trainer. Cutbacks I think are more about the types of horses that a trainer gets. For instance, Todd, Baffert, they get these, and Chad, they get these ultra talented, well-bred horses that for whatever reason are struggling to get the 8 furlongs, a little added distance. And when you cut that talented horse back with a bunch of fitness and a bunch of, furlongs under their belt, they run well. And so I think that when it comes to the cutback, it's more about the horse that the type of horse the trainer gets and the eye the trainer has for finding horses that will succeed in that situation. For instance, Todd and Chad. He's got an astronomical number with cutbacks. I'm not sure exactly what it is. Baffert usually does well. I think when it comes to stretching a horse out, it's the program that they're in and how that trainer puts in the extra stamina to them. They gallop them a lot. They do a lot of different things that can get a horse to kind of excel. And so, I think it's actually different. I think I think it's different on both sides for why and who excels at what.
Mike, do you use? I assume you do use the Formulator database to ascertain that type of knowledge about trainers who do well in those situations, and what are some of the filters within Formulator you might use to launch queries about these issues that Jonathan's talking about?
Absolutely true, and I'll back up what Jonathan said. Both with Chad. Chad does really well on dirt cutbacks in graded stakes. I don't have the number ahead of me or in front of me, but one of the angles I love for Bob Baffert is a similar one, particularly with 3-year-olds cutting back on dirt in a graded stake. And many of these are post-Derby or Oaks trail, where he realizes, he's got a talented horse. He's got a horse like Bayern, who in the Woody Stevens was a perfect example. Was on the Triple Crown trail, has some speed, cuts him back, keeps him in a graded stake, and you often get much better prices on many of these runners than you would on typical Baffert or Chad Brown runners or even Todd Pletcher runners. Fantastic angle. This is one I always love to look for, and Baffert seems to do it with 1 or 2 every year. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he does it with Cupid.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea for him going forward. We talked a bunch about the Derby on this show so far. We haven't talked at all about the Oaks. The dominoes are beginning to fall with the defection of Songbird. Mike, give us an update on who's pointing where in the wake of that news.
Well, I think the latest one to reconsider skipping the Oaks is Catherine Sophia. Now the service camp is saying we're not going to run in the 8 Bells. More likely, we're going to run in the Kentucky Oaks, and that's obviously directly because the legitimate favorite is now no longer going to be running in the Oaks, and they figure, well, we can run for $1 million instead of running for $200,000. So it makes it a much more wide open race. I think Steve Asmussen's got 3 runners in there. Rachel's Valentina is going to go for Todd. Weep No More. Karina Mia for Bill Mott. Of course, Landover Sea, who seemed like she was making a decent living running behind Songbird for a while out on the West Coast before she shipped east to finally get a win. She'll be in there. It becomes a much more wide open race than it was, a week and a half ago.
That's for sure. The other thing I wanted to just do a little update on is the Tepin situation. Now, it seems pretty clear from listening to Mark Cassie on Steve's Big Show this week that the Woodford Reserve will be on the dance card. This Royal Ascot situation, now I'm talking out of school here a bit, and I have zero inside info, just to make that clear. But I get the impression from reading some quotes, some of the owner quotes about Royal Ascot, and then the fact that Mark on Bick didn't even mention Royal Ascot. I think if we see Tepin at Royal Ascot, which is where I believe the owner's heart is right now, this may be an owner-picked spot situation. Jonathan, am I just a conspiracy theorist with a tinfoil hat in my basement in Brooklyn here, or do you think I might be onto something?
I have no idea. I'm going to plead the fifth on that one. I will always commend the owner for bringing her back, and if he decides he wants to put her on a plane, good for him. If the Cassie decide they want to do it, good for them. they have my approval to do whatever they want with that wonderful horse. I think we're just lucky to see her running still. So do as you will.
I think that's well put. I think that's very well put. And they're obviously only going to do what they think she can handle. From a sporting point of view, it'd be unbelievable. It'd be the kind of thing where if I thought she was going, I'm sort of on the fence right now about whether or not to make the trip to Royal Ascot. It would certainly help tip the scales for me. It'll be a very interesting story to follow. And I agree with everything you said, Jonathan. You have to commend all the connections with the job they've done with her. She's fantastic. That was one of the 10 best races I've ever seen live when we were fortunate enough to be on that balcony off the Phoenix Room on Saturday, watching her just crush that field with the greatest of ease. So, good Godspeed to the connections and continuing to make all the right decisions when it comes to Tepin. All right, let's talk about these public handicapper races. I've left us a little short of time on it, but I think we can get through them in a way where we won't have to rush. We're going to start off by talking about the Woodhaven at Aqueduct. This is a 1 1/16 mile on the grass for 3-year-olds. The morning line favorite is listed as number 7, Unbridled Daddy, but I was thinking the favorite here and the most likely winner might be number 2, Highland Sky, who had a little bit of trouble last time, and I had as a big flow move up coming off that last race. Jonathan, we'll start with you. Will the winner come from that group of 2, Unbridled Daddy and Highland Sky, or somewhere else?
Yeah, no, this is another race that brought me out of weekend retirement. When you get Todd in a race at 5-2 morning line, you get him in off of a win, you get Mott in off of a win, and then you get a 3-1 morning line on Barkley Tag. I mean, you're going to at least get a fair number. I think Highland Sky will probably end up being favored, but I love when I see a horse who can, as a 2-year-old, run a number that is competitive with what his competition has done as a 3-year-old. And obviously those, depending on what figures you look at, it's pretty close. Some are a little bit better, some are not. Highland Sky was closing into a slow pace. I mean, if I was going to play this pick 4, it would be one of those pick 4s where I would just absolutely stone cold single Highland Sky, would use no B horses, no C horses. If Unbridled Daddy wins or Mighty Mo wins and I lose, I think Highland Sky wins for fun in this race, and I don't even think it'll be close.
Now, speaking of Unbridled Daddy, last time, very impressive, first off the layoff. I think some people are going to look at that race and say, had prep, look out. Jonathan, you think this was kind of a last time was the time situation, despite the trouble in that race? You think the setup was such that you're just not keen on Unbridled Daddy, or is there more to your opposition?
No, I think that you'll remember a phrase that I said to you when we were in Keeneland. I looked at you and I said, if I bet another Todd horse shipping from Florida, then someone put me to sleep. And I'm just not going to do it. I learned my lesson. Todd's program is, don't get me wrong, it's good everywhere, but he does really well in South Florida. And this is something we've seen every year where a lot of horses that are shipping up from South Florida takes a little bit of an adjustment period. Maybe they just like their situation at Palm Beach Downs, and getting back up to the Big A isn't nearly as beautiful, so they struggle a little bit. But, for me, the Highland Sky, I understand what you're saying on a normal day, off of the layoff, second off a layoff, you'd expect the horse to improve, but I'm going to steer clear.
It was Mike Hogan on this very podcast who first familiarized me with that concept you're referring to, Jonathan, for Todd Pletcher, the idea that what happens at Gulfstream stays at Gulfstream. Mike, do you think that's the case with Unbridled Daddy, or do you give more of a shot than me and Jonathan do?
I think this is a pretty wide open race. I think it's a lot more wide open than what Jonathan would make you believe. I think he's got a chance, but I don't love him here. I think he's got to move forward in that second start off the layoff, and maybe he can, but at a short price, I wouldn't bet on it, certainly, and I'd much more likely want to bet against it. Mighty Mo, I think, makes sense. I think you're right in that Highland Sky is probably the most likely winner and probably your favorite, unless it's just the Todd Pletcher steam that ends up betting Unbridled Daddy. he's the one I would be leaning on heavily in multi-race wagers as an A. But there's another one that I really like in this race, and that's number 4, Too Discreet. A full brother to Discreet Mark for Christophe Clement, who went 2 for 2, sprinting at 5.5 furlongs at Saratoga on the turf as a 2-year-old. Now, those figures didn't come back terribly big from a buyer figure standpoint, but that's okay. I don't think this one wants... what's that?
They're 2-year-old figures.
Right, exactly. The speed figures are a little lower than some of the competition, but I don't think Too Discreet wants to sprint at 5.5 furlongs. I think if he's anything like his older sister, Discreet Mark, the longer the better for him. I think he will be forwardly placed, could very well run them off their feet, is coming off of a long layoff for Christophe. And I actually look, this is where I look and say, okay, some trainers do really well with these spots. Some trainers give the horse a race. Christophe, last 5 years, 10 runners have made their first route of their career following a layoff of 180 days or more. 6 of the 10 won. He's been working really well. He's one that I think could have a bit of a pace edge on some of these and might be ready to fire a big one off the layoff.
Do we think that the Dixie Runner, do we think that Too Discreet will be on the lead, or do we think that role will go to Dixie Runner, who I was thinking could end up being the clear speed here? What's your read on that situation, Mike?
It's hard to say. I think you could also make the case for Mighty Mo off of the win last out to be somewhat forwardly placed. I just think from the stretch out and from the freshening, I wouldn't be surprised to see Too Discreet be on the lead, but he doesn't need to be, and it could be a case where Dixie Runner and Irid on the inside try and cut the corner and go. It doesn't really matter to me. I think Too Discreet can kind of make his own race, probably in the first or second position, and then it's just a question of whether or not he's good enough to do it off the layoff.
Jonathan, when you're looking at a horse like Too Discreet, who hasn't run in so long, making the significant change, positive trainer stats, training at Payson, apparently training well, with all the bullets, but it's Payson against a handful of other rivals. How do you go about evaluating a horse like Too Discreet?
Well, I think the first thing you want to do is understand that like we've talked about earlier, where we've been talking about cutbacks and stretch outs. I'm not sure what Christophe's stats are, but just off of what Christophe does well, you figure that's not going to be an issue for him to get this horse to stretch out. You also would figure that he wouldn't toss him into the situation if he didn't think that it was something he could handle. I kind of, I'm not really sure who's going to go on the lead in this situation. I would think that it's probably going to be Kendrick, just based on how he's ridden in the winter. He's been very aggressive. He's gotten a lot of praise for his aggressiveness. So you would think it's stretching out from 5.5 with a fresh horse. And Irad, on the other hand, is one that's a little bit more likely to get a horse to try to relax a little bit. So I think Mike's onto something here with this horse. I just think that this is the horse I'm going to have to nail late. But I think Highland Sky is going to be too good.
All right, just to recap before we move on to the Elkhorn, that's going to be number 2, Highland Sky, for me and Jonathan. Mike going with number 4, Too Discreet. That's a little new feature of the podcast I threw in specifically by request for Scott Carson to make sure to know exactly who picked whom when we sometimes circumlocate a little bit around these races. All right, the Elkhorn. This is a 1.5 miles on the grass at Keeneland for 4-year-olds and up. For me, sometimes in these turf marathons, I start with the trainer. With that approach in this race, I'm led squarely to number 2, Up With the Birds for H. Graham Motion. He's a Grade 1 winner, albeit a restricted Grade 1 winner. He's reunited with Johnny V. The morning line of 3-1 might be a little bit light for a contest play situation, but he's the one that I'm the most interested in. Before we make our selections in this race, I'll start with Mike. Well, I'm going to ask both of you this. Who's going to be the favorite here?
Ooh, that's a good question. It's a very good question. I wouldn't be surprised. Okay, go ahead, Jonathan. If you have an opinion.
I think Kagan will be. I think Kagan will probably be the favorite. And that's the same reason why I picked the horse, is that, his last 5 races, he's been in the exacta. He's done that on 3 different surfaces at 3 different distances or 2 different distances. And I just think that when you get to these long races on the turf, it's kind of a specialty thing. And you either find a horse that does it really well, or you take a horse like we did a month ago or whatever with Grand Tito, who's trying it for the first time. And in this situation, I'm going to just stick with Kagan.
You didn't think he got a little lucky last time? I felt like without the trouble, Wake Forest wins that race. Kagan's been known to be a little camera shy. I was thinking maybe last time was the time. Am I selling him? You think I'm selling him short?
I know they like Wake Forest a lot, and Wake Forest was bet that day like they like him a lot, and Wake Forest ran pretty darn well. And I think if I remember correctly, Kagan got the worst of it 5 wide, and Wake Forest was up on the inside. So I upgraded him a little bit off that performance, beating that horse.
Interesting. I got to go back and look at that tape again. I wasn't looking at it from a ground loss point of view. I was in my memory he'd gotten a good setup, but that's a good point. Ground lost is still ground lost. Mike, what is your opinion in the Elkhorn?
I'm with Jonathan. I think it's Kagan, however you say it, his race to lose. I think this is a case of a horse just getting good, and maybe he just wants to go further. I have questions about the other legitimate contenders in here as to whether or not they're as good as they had been in the past. And I'm gonna go back to what you said about Up with the Birds and the trainer stat for Graham Motion. I too love Graham Motion as one that can get a horse to go long on the turf, especially in graded stakes. And just in the last 5 years, all turf route graded stakes of 12 furlongs, so 1.5 miles or further. He's 11 for 46, 24% win rate, 424 ROI. So you more than double your money if you bet them in any of, just a flat bet. It's fantastic. But the concern with me for Up with the Birds is he's coming off of a long layoff. And every one of those 11 runners was coming off of a layoff of fewer than 60 days. Up with the Birds is coming off of a layoff of nearly 6 months. So that's a concern for me. And if you filter in just even a layoff of 45 days or more, Motion is just 1 for 15 with only 3 others to hit the board. A lot of them were out of the money at short prices. I think at a short price, he's one I'd look to try and beat with a horse like Kagan, who is seemingly now rounding back into form and might want to just go 1.5 miles when I thought he was really more of a miler.
Another point, to your point, I definitely believe that Fair Hill, the training center there, the way that it's designed and all the different types of gallops they have and hills and whatnot, is a place to get a horse super fit off a layoff. Up with the Birds has not been training there. He's been at Palm Meadows, right? So
right. Yep.
That might speak to your point. Between that and the price concerns, I'm going to mention the long shot that I'm also considering here, who I think for public handicapper I'd definitely put on top. That's number 4, Idolo Porteno, the Argentinian horse, who outran, as a pick on this podcast from me, outran the odds last time in the Razorback, getting back to turf where he certainly had some success in his native land. Should be an awfully big price here. That might be for contest purposes, not a bad place to go. Before we leave this race and move on to the Laurel race, I just want to get a 2-second opinion from Jonathan on number 6, Twilight Eclipse, who's run some really big races and won some really big races in his time. Do we think that we think there's some light at the end of the tunnel here, or have we seen the best of him at this point, and he's not one you're too concerned about today?
No, I mean, before I knock him, I want to say how cool it would be to own a horse like this. I mean, what a fun ride West Point Thoroughbreds and their partners have had with this horse. But the idea that he is a West Point horse, he is a gelding, it's a great marketing opportunity for them to continue to, as long as the horse is sound and healthy, just to keep showing up in these big races and to allow their partners to come and have a good time and throw on their buttons, and that's just kind of what I see it as. I would imagine he's on the downslide, and he's just here for entertainment purposes only, and I would definitely bet against him.
Are you saying somebody can have a good time out at Keeneland Racecourse? I'm shocked, Jonathan.
Well, as long as it's not too hot and you don't got that jacket on.
Is a good point. That's an interesting way to look at that race looking at it from a connections point of view. All right, we got about 13 minutes left. That should be plenty. We're going to move on to the 10th race at Laurel. We're back on the turf here. Will our friend and friend of the podcast, Gabby Gaudette, be at Laurel on Saturday doing the TV work? Do we know that?
I don't know. I would imagine so. I think that's where she's back at, but I'm not 100% sure.
That would be cool. We can look at her Twitter feed and ascertain that pretty quickly, I'm sure. We'd love to have her back on the show someday. But so the Clark is a mile. We're looking at 3-year-olds and up. Jonathan, we're going to start with you. The favorite here looks like number 1, Cage Fighter for Matt Sherra and Chuck Lawrence. Is that where you're heading, or do you have something a little more clever for us here?
Yeah, I think it's a little more clever. Like I said before, I'm always looking for. I love it when I see significant changes in a horse, and I know a lot of times the tote board doesn't catch up to first-time gelding. And the 4, Mr. Brightside, was brought over here from England. Ran in the Twilight Derby, which is a really cool race they have at Santa Anita right around Breeders' Cup time. Ran well in that race. Not as well in the Hollywood Derby. Was transferred to Paddy Gallagher. Didn't run as well, and apparently they had some issue there, and they decided to cut the horse. And now he ships out east in a lower level stake than he was running out in California. And I would and has been working at your famed Fair Hill, and I would expect that he'll be ready off the break with the equipment change and hopefully a good price.
The ultimate equipment change, indeed. Mike, where are you headed in this race?
Well, so I am also on Mr. Brightside, but I will note that the date of the equipment change was just yesterday. I don't think he was gelded yesterday. I think it was just reported yesterday, and I actually made my pick the day before it became news that Mr. Brightside was now a gelding. So it's just one of those happy accidents that maybe now helps confirm something that I had thought before. The interesting thing for me with Mr. Brightside is this is now the 3rd trainer he's had in North America after starting his career in Britain and running very well. Shipping over to run in some graded stakes in Southern California. Jeremy Noceda was the trainer in Europe, kept him for 2 starts, had a very famous, you may remember this, very famous tweet after the Hollywood Derby where he said, "First time I've ever had a jockey school my horse in a grade 1." Which if you wanna watch an eventful ride, take a look at Mr. Brightside's trip in that Hollywood Derby. So then, unsurprisingly, gets a jockey switch to Mike Smith. Next out in the Mathis brothers, again had another difficult trip. Now ships to Niall Seville, who's very good with new stock, especially in turf races. And the whole time it's all the same owner. So I think he's shipping out here to get a win in him. I think he could be a legitimate turf runner wherever they decide to run him. And Seville knows what to do with a good horse. He's had Legendary and a few other really good turf runners.
Not to throw salt in an old wound, but is there something horse players can do about that problem that you just identified, Mike, where we have this obviously incorrect information in the black and white of the form about the date this horse was gelded? I mean, I guess we would technically say the date it was reported as a workaround. We're not putting anything in action there. But what can a horse player do maybe to foment, not the powers that be at DRF, but Equibase or who's ever supplying the data? Is there anything a horse player can do to help us strive to get more accurate information in this regard, or is it something we have to live with forever?
What I would say is use your head and look at Mr. Brightside in particular as an example to that. He was working at Payson, and there's a gap in his work tab of about 3 weeks before he shipped to Fair Hills, and he's worked a couple times at Fair Hills and then was listed as reported as being gelded on just yesterday. I'm going to assume that 3-week gap where he shipped from Payson to Fair Hills was also coincided with the time that he was really gelded, unless he was gelded even earlier than that, before he was shipped at all out from from Southern California. But I take a look at it and just try and figure out what's most likely. And to me, that seems the most likely possibility. And then you can go into Formulator under horse notes, and you can say, date the horse was most likely gelded appears to be X. So you can save that information going forward if you feel like it's inaccurate compared to the actual reported date.
All right, I didn't do enough work on this race to give a pick in good conscience, and that's a great thing about the public handicapper contest. You're allowed to skip races, so for this one, we just have one horse, number 4, Mr. Brightside, picked by both Jonathan and Mike. I realized I didn't do the little recap on the Elkhorn. In that one, I was going with number 4, Idolo Perteno, both Mike and Jonathan going with number 7, Kygan or Kagan. We got to figure out how to say that. I think I'm going to go with Kagan, but Kagan. Mike, you
okay.
Think it was Kygan?
I don't know. I have no strong opinion one way or another.
Claim no special knowledge of the pronunciation of this horse. Okay, the final race is the Charlestown Classic. It's their 12th race on Saturday. It's a 17-turn mile and an eighth. I do not. There's a lot of things in horse racing Twitter that I do not understand. Generally speaking, most of them have to do with the negativity. But in this case, it's not the sort of general negativity. It's a specific negativity. I do not understand all of the negativity surrounding my guy, Donworth, who I know Jonathan and I both liked last time in Santa Anita, had an international bad trip. I thought that should be very clearly just put a line through and see what he's got the next time. I liked the comeback race. But I've read multiple people, and I'm not talking about yahoos here. I'm talking about people whose opinions I respect, dismissing this horse as like the most overhyped horse in history. I'm tempted to stick with the guy. Jonathan, where did you land in this race, and tell me where you stand at this point with Donworth as an individual?
We were lucky enough the day after the Keeneland tournament to get over to WinStar, and I got to see Tiz Now roll out first versus like 7 or 8 other stallions, and I just couldn't do anything but appreciate how large he is. He's like a giraffe. And if Donworth is anything like his dad, and size-wise, he's going to struggle with these 3 turns, it feels like. I'm not sure Mario's experience riding over that course, which is obviously a little bit trickier than others. I've landed on a horse that I landed on in the Big Cap last time. We talked about the performances of horses coming out of the Big Cap, and I'm on Imperative here. I thought Imperative, was really coming into a big race there. I know that he's been training really well for Richie Baltas out in California for the last 3 or 4 starts, and I just haven't seemed to get him home, chasing the likes of Opportunity and Dortmund and California Chrome and Melatonin, who came back and ran well. So Imperative for me is going to be one that I'm definitely going to get home. There's a horse that I've always disliked that I'm going to give a chance to get a little bit of a piece, and that's Hard Aces. Based on his last performance, I thought he ran really well. So I'm going to try to hook those 2 up in some type of trifecta.
Let me talk to you about Imperative's last race. The horse was wide, made an early move into a race where the flow might have suggested that that could be an upgrade, but it was, of course, a horse on the front end who held on and won. I just wasn't sure what to make of it. Why are you so quick to excuse Imperative's last?
Well, I'm glad you came back to me. I was trying to figure out how I was going to interrupt you to get one more point in. It's forgiven because it's forgiven because of his ability to perform on this course. He's run first and second in this race before, which answers a big question all these horses have to answer: is how are they going to handle the 3 turns? How are they going to handle the tight turns, the configuration, and how and all that stuff? And he's handled it before. Mike Smith has won this race a few times with Game On Dude, maybe if not twice, once at least. And so, for all of those reasons, I'll forgive him for his last performance. And apparently, he was running against some pretty good horses in Melatonin, FNX, etc.
All excellent points, and I'm glad you also mentioned that just as you, a Texas resident, considers Santa Anita your home track, perhaps Imperative, a California resident, considers a track in West Virginia his home track. So it's all starting to compute with me. Mike, did you land on either of the 2 we've discussed so far, or somewhere completely different?
Yeah, and I'm going to take a little bit of an issue with your hosting skills here, Pete, because you gave it to Jonathan and he stole my pick last race, and you didn't give me a chance to make the case for Imperative first this race. race. So now I'm 2 races in a row, stealing 3 races in a row, in fact, because he tipped Kagan before I had a chance. So I got to take issue here.
That's fair. I don't think there's anybody sitting at home listening thinking that you're stealing Jonathan's picks. Everybody knows it's on the up and up, but that is fair. I made my usual copious hosting notes that I've tweeted out before, but I didn't include in the notes this time who goes first in which race. Sometimes I am that ADD. Today I was not, and I intuitively threw it the wrong way. You have my humble apologies, and I owe you apologies.
That's okay. That's okay. I think it's Imperative's race to lose. I think, and my question for you guys, I think Donworth is not only the favorite, but a very short-priced one. My over/under for him is about, I would say, about 9-5. I think he's going to be a very, very strong favorite off of that horrible trouble and noticeable trouble. He's a horse that I think a lot of people are going to be betting based on potential upside rather than what the horse has done in the past, which is something I love to bet against at a short price. Look, he can win, but I think Imperative, like you said, Pete, he's 2 for 2 in the exacta at Charlestown. He's 0 for 15 on dirt elsewhere. So that should tell you how much he likes this track. Mike Smith knows what to do. I think you also talk about circling a race on the calendar. I think when Richie Baltus got Imperative into his barn, even way back last year, they circled this race on the calendar. I can forgive the big cap at a little further than he's proven he wants to go. I think the 1 1/8 on the Charlestown surface is exactly what Imperative wants, and I hope people bet really, really heavily on Donworth because it'll just help our price on Imperative.
Now, it's obviously way early, but this is just a fun toy I like to play around with once in a while. On publichandicapper.com, you can click and look at the odds to get an idea of what price a horse is within the universe of the contest. Within that universe right now, and I know it's early, Donworth 6-1, Imperative 5-2. I think they're both going to take a whole lot of money, and I think they could both be lower than their morning lines. I don't think people are going to sleep on the Imperative horse for course angle. And while a lot of times people don't like to go beyond the last race, I feel like pretty often they'll go 2 back, and if you go 2 back on Imperative, you see that big 105 Beyer speed figure staring you in the face. So it's going to be very interesting to see the betting. One last horse to discuss before we recap and finish the show today. Do either of you guys have a strong opinion about Stanford?
Yes.
Positive or negative?
No. And we'll go back to what we were saying earlier. What happens in Gulfstream stays at Gulfstream. This is a horse who has, I guess he was disqualified and placed 6th, but in terms of finished position has never been out of the exacta at Gulfstream. Doesn't seem to do quite as well other places, and certainly in a graded stake with this level of competition, I think he's going to be over bet based on the Pletcher-Castellano combination, and he's one that would have to beat me and prove it to me that he's as good as he's likely going to be in terms of value. I see no value in playing him, and I just don't think he's good enough.
All right, so there you have it. On the Charlestown Classic, Jonathan and Mike both going with number 5, Imperative. I'm going to be a stubborn jerk here and stick with number 4, Donworth, and we're going to see what happens. There's lots of good action on PH on Saturday. If you're playing contests this weekend, just want to underline a couple of things. On Saturday, we've got an NHCQ qualifying event. We've also got a Santa Anita event on DRFqualify.com, the NHC one, of course, on NHCqualify.com. But the big news in the contest universe, as first announced here on our Wednesday show, on Sunday we're going to be running a qualifier for the $10,000 Belmont Day Challenge. Contest players should definitely look into that. I think it's about a $250 buy-in. You have a chance to win that $10,000 entry plus a travel stipend as well. I think that's going to be a great way to check out that exciting new contest from NYRA. Jonathan, we're going to see your name in there, you think, or have you not committed yet?
Yeah, I think so. Well, we'll see. I'm still in between returns. Let's see. If I can hit the pick 6 today, Keeneland, then I'm definitely in. I'll buy 2 entries. We'll see.
I like the way you think, and you've done it before, so it's a distinct possibility. Mike, anything else from you before we send it away?
No, that's it for me. Just a lot of good racing this weekend. Even though it's a little bit of a lull on the Triple Crown prep and the Oaks prep, there's still some good races, so it should be fun.
Another thing I'll mention real quick, DRF Bets having a cash contest on Sunday. Their Sunday Fun Day event, $50 goes into the prize pool. You bet another 50, I think it is, 10 $5 win bets across 3 tracks. You can check out all the scoop on that at drfbets.com. I'm going to have my preview article posting soon. Still waiting on a quote for my NYRA article that's been slow in coming. I may just have to run it without it. But thanks to everybody for listening. Thanks to Jonathon Kinchen. Thanks to Mike Hogan. We will be back next week. May you win all your photos.